Dr. Milton Obote returns to Uganda after 9 years in exile. As he bends to kiss his native soil, his supporters rally round to acclaim him as the man who will restore stability to the turmoil that is Ugandan politics. Obote says he's returned to fight in the forthcoming elections. He was Prime Minister of the country from 1962 until his overthrow in 1971. Now he hopes that Ugandans will look favourably upon that period and return him and his Ugandan People's Congress Party to power. Obote returns with the blessing of President Nyerere of Tanzania. A year after the overthrow of Idi Amin, 11,000 Tanzanian troops remain to keep order in Uganda. Their presence in downtown Kampala is an attempt to secure relative peace in a capital still suffering from the ravages of the Amin dictatorship. Whoever succeeds in gaining power, the problems of reconstruction are immense. There is widespread lawlessness. In Kampala, 400 people are murdered every month. With the country brutalized by the Amin years, there is a mood of violence and despair. Officialdom is corrupt. Tribalism and sectarianism are rife. So it will be a rough road back for this once prosperous and fertile country. With its institutions disrupted and its economy in ruins, Uganda offers few comforts to its inhabitants. But for some, it's worse, far worse. In the far north of the country, the largely pastoral Karamoja tribe have had most of their cattle killed by fleeing Amin troops or stolen by raiders. Now a drought has reduced them to a desperate plight. In the midst of this chaos, the authorities have decided to call elections. The belief is that only a government with the respect which comes from an electoral mandate can begin the long process of recovery. Dr. Obote has returned to seek that mandate. He chose his own tribal stronghold in the north for his first rally, and there was no doubting the enthusiasm of his welcome. Dr. Obote's support in the country as a whole, however, is more difficult to measure. After nearly 10 years in office in the 1960s, many Ugandans initially acclaimed his overthrow. The largest tribal group, the Baganda, held him accountable for the ouster and death of their king. Obote's period in office was marked by one-man and one-party rule, backed up by the power of the military. Obote's system was to turn on him. His chief of staff, Major General Idi Amin, staged a coup and began a period of rule which saw the economic and social collapse of Uganda. The first victims of the Amin period were the 90,000 Ugandan Asians who were so vital to the country's economy. The Asians had dominated Uganda's trade and commerce, and when they were expelled, they took skills and know-how that Amin simply couldn't replace. The excesses of the Amin dictatorship are legion. The Big Daddy caricature of the amiable buffoon masked a grim reality. Between 200 and 500,000 Ugandans are thought to have perished during Amin's reign of terror. The rich agricultural wealth of coffee and cotton reverted to bush. Uganda became an importer of food. Economic and political development was reversed as the country became the fiefdom of the unpredictable Amin and his military forces. This rule only ended in October 1978, when Amin let 2 of his crack regiments go on the rampage in Tanzania. The Tanzanian response was swift. President Nyerere of Tanzania revoked a pledge of non-intervention he had given the Organization of African Unity in 1972 and invaded Uganda. His forces and those opposed to Amin met little serious resistance. The Ugandan people saw it as a liberation, but their trials weren't over. At Parliament buildings, the defeat of Amin saw the swearing in of a new government pledged to restore democracy. The Ugandan exiles formed themselves into the Uganda National Liberation Front and named Professor Yusufu Lule as the country's new interim president. Lule, a former vice-chancellor of Uganda's prestigious Makerere University, said he took the job in order to get rid of Amin, to rehabilitate the nation and prepare for elections within 2 years. But his role was disputed between those who demanded that he should be a caretaker president only and others who said he should hold full executive powers. The new rulers of Uganda were far from united behind Lule.
So let us unite together and face the future with confidence.
After disagreements with his fellow exile leaders in the ruling National Consultative Council, President Lule relied increasingly on a small circle of advisors and became isolated at the top. A tremendous amount needed to be done. Every aspect of Ugandan life had been touched by the Amin period and the struggle to overthrow him. Amin's formal residence, the State House. Inside, the floors were strewn with files on fellow Ugandans. His systematic elimination of real and imagined opponents had shorn the country of men of ability who could have aided in its economic and social reconstruction. The new president, with this legacy of fear, found it difficult to place his trust in the ruling council. A political conservative from the country's largest tribe, the Baganda, Lule was increasingly opposed by more radical members. After only 68 days, he was deposed and replaced by a former Attorney General, Geoffrey Benaiza.
I don't know whether my distinguished predecessor was led into temptation when he is alleged to have told the BBC that he was still president of this country, which was completely untrue, and I issued a statement to that effect. That was untrue. And
Benaiza, it was thought, would be more inclined to consult with his fellow members on the ruling council. But Benaiza's presidency was not to be a long one. After 10 months, he had not made any headway with Uganda's massive problems. Worse, he was accused of heading a fumbling, incompetent and corrupt government. When he tried to curb the role of the army and demote its commander-in-chief, he too was deposed and replaced by a military commission.
Among the people of Uganda would certainly suffer.
By Benaiza to the Tanzanian president for aid did not rescue his presidency. President Nyerere, with a large section of his army in Uganda, is still the effective power broker there. Benaiza's lack of progress in dealing with his country's problems led Nyerere to acquiesce to his downfall. In the present power vacuum, Nyerere is said to support his old friend Milton Obote in his bid to regain power in Uganda.
You'll obviously expect that there will be a lot of people there on Tuesday. But from that particular part of the country, or will there be people brought from...
Obote has pledged to seek the premiership through the democratic process. But did he not see any irony in advocating democratic elections when these were so absent during his own rule in the 1960s?
No, it's not. There is some error by all sorts of people in thinking that I had banned political parties. I had not banned political parties. When I was overthrown in a military coup in 1971, there were members of various political parties in the national parliament. There was no formal amendment of the constitution debarring other political parties to function in Uganda. But
nevertheless, no other parties were existing in Uganda at that time.
They were existing. The Democratic Party, for example, was existing. What I think you are referring to is a ban imposed by the Minister of Internal Affairs on the 19th of December 1969, banning political party operations. And that was a ban imposed under emergency regulations. It was not a constitutional ban.
Dr. Obote, you once described yourself as a gentle revolutionary. Are you still that?
I remain a gentle revolutionary.
And what does that mean?
It means I want revolutionary changes in Uganda. And without revolutionary changes, I would never have been able to create one Uganda, that's one country, one people, with one parliament, with one judiciary. At the time of independence, we had 5 governments, 5 parliaments, 5 judiciaries, a dissected, a fragmented society. When I left in 1971, it was one country, with one parliament, with one judiciary, with one people.
Opposing Dr. Obote's Ugandan People's Congress will be the Democratic Party of ex-President Lule. This party is seeking an alliance with a new group formed around a member of the present military commission, Yoweri Museveni. Museveni is a former radical student leader who became a military commander and then defense minister in the Post-Amin government. Once a supporter of Obote and a member of the youth wing of his UPC, he now warns against the threat of another dictatorship. It's estimated that Museveni commands the loyalty of just over half the 6,500 strong Ugandan army. Would his party, the Uganda Patriotic Movement, not be a military-based one?
Why should the background be military? Why? The only background, military background, is that we overthrew a dictatorship by means of a revolution, that's all. So I would not accept, as some people are trying to do, like Benessa, for instance, and some other chaps, who wanted to erase the contribution of the fighting forces from the history of Uganda, to the extent of even wanting to disband the fighters who fought and scatter them, send them back to the villages. That one we cannot accept, because that is an attempt to negate our history.
But do you want the military to remain in control?
No, 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 no. What happens is that we have used armed struggle to solve a situation which would not be solved by any other means. Now that that has been accomplished, we go to the next phase of broadening democracy and involving the population. That's all it means. So, but if somebody wants to eliminate any contribution by the armed struggle, then that's a negative. It's not positive, it's not developmental.
Kampala's tallest building. This commercial bank has weaknesses in its construction which could bring tons of concrete cladding crashing down onto the pavement below. It could scarcely be a more symbolic warning about the political and economic future of the state. The immediate outlook is poor. There are many shortages. The most obvious cues are the motorists waiting for petrol. Uganda's oil supplies have to be trucked in over deteriorating roads from Kenya. The trucks race in to reach the city before darkness and the official curfew. Black market prices have to be paid for many of the goods which are brought in from neighboring states. After so many years in which a black market mentality was the norm, Ugandans are now gripped by it. In the market, there is no shortage of bananas at a price. Bunches of plantains are the staple diet. Last November, they cost 80 shillings, the equivalent of 10 American dollars. Today, they sell for over 200 shillings. The shilling is freely exchanged at 10 times its official rate. Difficult times then in the towns, but all these problems are dwarfed by the famine that stalks the countryside, especially in the north. Like other countries in East Africa, Uganda is haunted by the spectre of hunger and starvation. Millions of people are threatened and thousands have died. Worst hit is the northeast province of Karamoja, where the food situation is made even worse by another threat, cattle rustling. About 40 head of cattle were seized by raiders, but a few minutes before our arrival with the United Nations food convoy, a unit of the Uganda People's Militia had staged a rescue act. The cattle thieves were driven off or shot dead. A lone Ugandan soldier manning a roadblock couldn't say whether the road ahead was safe or not. Cattle thieves and other bandits are well armed with automatic weapons. About 20,000 rifles were looted from a Karamoja barracks in the chaos following the fall of Amin. Whole villages have been robbed and terrorized, disrupting local food growing. A handful of cooking leaves is about the only crop available. The Karamoja tribespeople have been forced increasingly off the land and into the towns by this combination of circumstances, but they can't be sure of finding food. Our convoy was the first in 5 days to reach Moroto, the province's main town, 300 miles north of Kampala. One of the main distribution centers for relief in the town is the Queen of Heaven Mission, and most of the food and medicine comes from international and voluntary organizations. But coordination between the aid groups and the government has been poor, and this means even more suffering for the people here. The Karamoja traditionally live a primitive life, and like the Maasai tribes of Kenya, they have subsisted mainly on cow's milk and blood. That's why the cattle raiding has had such a disastrous effect. The Karamoja are thought to number 200,000, but according to missionaries, they have been dying at the rate of hundreds a day. Once a proud and independent people, they are now reduced to beggars, waiting for food that all too often simply fails to arrive. When we arrived, the last barrel of maize porridge was being served out. It's not much of a meal, and there is nowhere near enough to feed all the hungry mouths. The mission staff insist on feeding the children first because it's the very young, like the very old, who have the least chance of surviving famine. The adults have to wait their turn, and sometimes the hunger even drives them to fight among themselves. The relief agencies are spending millions of dollars in their efforts to feed these people. But with the chaos and lawlessness in the outlying regions, not enough food is getting through. When it does, it's usually a matter of too little, too late. The saddest sight is children of only 5 or 6 years reconciled to death, and soon to join the growing number of famine victims buried in the mission graveyard. Here, the body of an 8-year-old boy is carried to a freshly dug grave. As a rule, the local tribes don't bury their dead, but simply leave them out in the open. The boy's parents, however, had left him at the mission with only one request, that when he died, he should be buried as a Christian. There were no relatives at the graveside, just the mission staff, to see the wish fulfilled. The difficulties of getting relief aid through to Moroto were outlined by the mission head, Father Mario de Francesco.
Starting from last year, from about July to November, they, for the first time, came and brought food here to Karamoja. Then at the end of November, because they were troubled by soldiers and some of the lorries were hijacked, so they decided to stop, with a promise that they would start again at the beginning of January. But at the beginning of January, nothing came. So at the beginning of February, the Bishop, Monsignor Mazzoldi, and me went down to Kampala to tell the authorities that the people were dying of cholera and of hunger. So when we went down there, they promised that within 1 week, food would come to Karamoja. But we had to wait till the middle of March before the first consignment came. They promised to give us about 9,000 tons of posho, this maize flour, but only 900 tons could come to Karamoja. And then because of opposition, we may say, from the government of Kenya, who would not give this consignment, they could not carry on their program of distributing about 300 tons of posho every week.
So, who really is to blame? Are you saying that the world acted too late?
Well, it is too late now, yes. If no food is coming, many people will die. Many have already died. We see people dying every day. Missionaries going along, they find these people dead on either side of the road. So many really have died so far. And if food is not coming, many will die.
The priest's warning is underlined by the harrowing scenes at the orphanage. Most children have lost their parents, but those with mothers are often left hungry too. The orphanage is being helped by the Save the Children relief group. The problems are immense. There is a chronic shortage of even staple foodstuffs like maize, and the arrival of 70 tons of skimmed milk from European common market countries didn't solve everything. Most children are in such poor physical condition that they cannot hold liquids for more than a few minutes. Each day, waiting for their meager rations, the orphans have to show the patience of the old. For the adults in Moroto, most of the day is spent waiting around government buildings and hoping for food or news of another relief convoy from the outside world. At least ready cash is no longer a big problem for the aid groups. With pictures of the famine seen around the world, there has been a huge public response in several countries to appeals for more funds. Since these scenes were filmed, there has been rain in Karamoja for the first time in 2 years, and 30 tons of maize seeds and thousands of hoes are being brought into the area. It's doubtful, though, whether many of the villagers now have the strength to work in the fields. Helping the starving children at the Namalu mission is a French nun, Sister Elaine.
Now, the problem of this child is that he's the fifth of the family, and the 4 first children are dead. And the mother is asking if we can help for the food for this one, at least to have 1 child. What can we do?
Is this simple starvation?
Only starvation. All those are only starvation. That is starvation. Look, come, by you. This one, that is. Because of starvation, nothing can heal. And they get this type of thing.
Sister Elaine explains the full horror of slow starvation. Besides the general deterioration in physique, the body loses its powers of resistance to disease.
disease kill the children because they have...
Minor diseases leave no marks on a healthy body, but with these children, they become lethal.
Only they die of disease.
Hunger, she says, makes disease, and the only solution is careful, regular feeding. Many leaves in the bush are nourishing and supplement the local diet in normal times. But with the drought and with no crops to harvest, the local people have been eating all kinds of leaves and shoots. Many are bitter, and fermentation in the stomach causes pain and swelling and internal bleeding. Sister Elaine is resigned to the fact that many of these children will soon be dead. Such is the immensity of the tragedy surrounding the people of Karamoja. For whatever party or politician holds power in the coming months and years, the Karamoja famine will be just one of many problems to be tackled in Uganda. And for hundreds, possibly thousands, help will arrive too late.
Where would be the nearest mission that we could take her to?
Well, there is nothing to do. She will die on the way, and you can't reanimate when it has reached such a point.
Now there's still about 10 minutes or so.
The woman was barely alive. She seemed to be a young mother whose children had presumably already died. Even Sister Elaine could offer nothing more than a comforting hand. She sensed that the end couldn't be far away.
She's a young woman. She must have probably, she's feeding. And
apart from hunger, does she have cholera or anything?
no, that is just hunger, that's all. But I can't stand to leave this woman to die on the road like that.
Sister, did you say she was dead?
She's dead.
Death by starvation, Uganda, 1980. It's an epitaph likely to be repeated too many times in the months ahead.